Yo, what's happening, guys? This is Rocco, and thanks again for visiting my channel. And today, I'm going to be kicking off a series that I've been dying to do for the longest fucking time, but just never had the chance. That's right. From the title, you probably already know what this is going to be. It's going to be a series on one of my all-time favorite bands, Genesis. Now, Genesis has been a band that I got into a little bit later than a lot of my other favorite bands. I think it was about 2011 when I was, I think, 15 or, yeah, when I was about 14 years old when I started getting into them. And I got into them like well after I got into Yes, Rush, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, like my previous favorite bands. And I think when I got into them, I was at such an impressionable age. I was just starting high school, and it opened the floodgates of my mind when I first heard Genesis. I got so heavily into them in those first few years of high school, and since then, my love for this band has not waned one iota. I mean, this band has been with me my entire life, and I listen to them on a regular basis. I honestly think they're one of the most atmospheric bands. They produce some of the most cinematic musical experiences you can ever imagine, and they just really mean a lot to me. So I'm just been dying to do this series. We're gonna be going through all of the Genesis albums from Trespass to We Can't Dance. I'll get more into that later because I'm sure if you're a Genesis fan, you know I've left off two albums, but we'll get into that later. And I'm just going to be going through, all the songs, basically giving a mini review of all of these albums. But I can't really call it a review because I'm very biased when it comes to Genesis. Like I've been listening to them for so long, and I have such a deep personal connection with the band that I can't really say anything like overtly negative about them because they've just been such an ingrained part of my life. And yeah, I'm just gonna be going through the album. Hopefully, it's a fun retrospective. I'll give you guys my impressions on a lot of the songs. And one thing you guys got to know is that I'm no musician, so I can't really get into the musicality in terms of the actual musical terms to describe these songs. I'm just going to be talking about what they mean to me and just interesting points throughout. Also getting into like a little bit of the history of the band and yeah, just talking about basically whatever pops into my head. So thank you so much for joining me. I can't wait to do this. We're going to be kicking it off with the masterpiece Trespass from 1970. Now, I bet you're wondering, whoa, whoa, whoa there, slow down, buddy. You skipped an album. That's right, I did skip an album. I skipped from Genesis to Revelation, which is technically their debut album. And I put a lot of emphasis on the word technically because myself, many Genesis fans, and fuck it, the band itself, do not consider this their true debut album. Their true debut album is Trespass. From Genesis to Revelation, just forget about it. Don't even listen to it. It's a crappy album. And in the band's credit, they were just finishing high school. They were young, inexperienced, and they came in contact with this record producer, Jonathan King, who was a huge fucking Bee Gees fan. And at the time, the Bee Gees were just like, I was never a Bee Gees fan. They had some good stuff with Saturday Night Fever, but in the 60s, they were just this lame pop band. And anyway, Jonathan King was a huge fan of that band, and he took an interest in Genesis when they were just starting out. Now, Genesis literally did everything in their power to suck this guy's cock. Like they totally morphed their sound to match the Bee Gees, apparently. And like I didn't even know the Bee Gees were pop until I heard this story, but they produced from Genesis to Revelation, which is an extremely odd album. It's kind of like a concept album with its religious themes, but not really because I don't know, it doesn't really go and delve into the details of the Bible. It just has general terms like the serpent, in the beginning, things like that. And yeah, this album, I cannot get into it. I'm the biggest Genesis fan, and as I mentioned before, I'm very biased towards Genesis, and I have tried and tried and tried to get into this album, and I just simply can't. It's just a boring album. The songwriting is not up to par, and it's just man, it's there's this orchestration, this overbearing orchestration it just feels tacked on. And in the band's credit, they were young. Peter Gabriel sounds fantastic on this album. Like his voice is great. Okay, it hasn't fully blossomed, but it's good. And musically, it's not bad either. It's just the songwriting is lame and boring. And the funny thing about this album is that it got stashed away in the religious section in all the record stores because of the title, From Genesis to Revelation. And yeah, if you're think about it, if you're a teenager back in 1969, are you going to be sifting through the Christianity section at your local record store? Fuck no. You're going to be getting like satanic shit like Black Sabbath, like Led Zeppelin's debut album, stuff like that. Not that it's actually satanic, I'm just kidding, but you're going to be getting like, cool albums. And the album cover was black and it just got forgotten. So the band, like, they knew it wasn't for them. It wasn't like their true sound. So they ditched Jonathan King and they got back to the old grind. Like they started touring and like playing and developing songs. And after touring for about, I don't know, I'd say like at least like half a year, they really started honing in on their sound and get laying down the foundation of that Genesis sound, which I'm going to be talking about a lot in this series. And I really think that a big influence on them at the time that played a big part in shaping that sound was King Crimson's in the Court of the Crimson King. As a prog fan, you already know this album's one of the greatest of all time. But this was the album that first showed that you could take rock as your groundwork and you could do so much more with it. You could morph it and mold it and shape it into whatever you wanted. You could add violin, you could add saxophone, you can extend a song well past singles at the time were about 2 to 3 minutes. You can extend songs well past there and just explore so many different like soundscapes and atmospheres. And I really think Genesis looked at that album at the time and thought, damn, like this is where music is heading. And they really like shaped their sound and expanded their sound, totally ditching like their sound on From Genesis to Revelation. So forget about that album. We're starting off with Trespass. That's our year zero, okay? And oh my God, Trespass is a monumental jump in quality from Genesis to Revelation. And okay, Genesis to Revelation did have a couple pretty good songs, like in the beginning and things like that, but it's just nowhere near as good as Trespass. Okay, Trespass is one of my personal favorite albums, and I'll get into why, but it's just fantastic. So so yeah, Genesis, they were touring as I mentioned before, and they ending up in the recording studio, signed to Charisma Records, where they stayed for quite some time under the under Tony Stratton Smith, who is their new record producer. And yeah, so they wrote Trespass and released it. And just a funny anecdote, I was surprised to find that this album was huge in Italy when it came out. And my background is Italian. I have Italian heritage, and I found that hilarious. Like out of all the countries that that listened to this album, Italy gave it so much attention, and I always found that great. So they toured Italy, they toured Belgium, promoting this album, and it was just the first step in the Genesis sound. So let's dive right into it. All right, so I guess we're gonna have to start off with the lineup on this album. So who do we got here? Who are the early members of Genesis? So we got Peter Gabriel on vocals, one of the greatest vocalists of all time. I'm sure not much more could be said about that. We got Tony Banks on the keyboard, the mastermind, the man that would shape the sound of Genesis more than any other member. And then we got Mike Rutherford, another amazing guy in the band. Great bass player, great acoustic guitar player, great rhythm guitar player, just an amazing multi instrumentalist. Kind of like the John Paul Jones of Genesis. That's how I think of him. And who do we have? We have Anthony Phillips on the guitar. Now, the interesting thing about this album is it's the only studio album, other than From Genesis to Revelation, to feature Anthony Phillips. And I love this guy, man. Like his guitar playing on this album adds just a layer of complexity and texture to the sound that was kind of never really touched upon again in Genesis's entire career. No, don't get me wrong. His replacement, Steve Hackett, is literally like he's easily in my top five guitarists of all time. But it was nice to have that nice pastoral sound that Anthony Phillips was bringing on the 12 string. And I've actually checked out his solo career, which is vast, surprisingly. uh, this recent year. My friend actually made me listen to his album, the Geese and the Ghost. And although I did find that album a tad overlong from like the first two listens, I really did appreciate how amazing this guy was on the acoustic guitar. I mean, he was a master. So, and I've seen interviews with the band saying that he was really the leader of the band at the time. Like he was guiding the band's sound, guiding their direction, and the poor guy just he had too much stage fright when the band started picking up momentum and touring. And I don't know. After this album, he couldn't really take the spotlight, and he left the band. So Trespass is the only album with Anthony Phillips on lead guitar. So enjoy it while it lasts. It would have been really interesting to see how Genesis would have evolved keeping Anthony Phillips on the guitar. But you can't really change history. It's like saying, "Oh, what would Zeppelin be like today if John Bonham didn't pass away?" But Anthony Phillips was fantastic on this album. And then finally, you have John Mayhew on drums. Probably the most obscure member of the band. He was only on this album. They pretty much fired him to hire Phil Collins because let's face it, you hear this guy and then you hear Phil Collins. It's a no-brainer. You're gonna hire Phil Collins. Like, who cares if they had history together? Just fuck them, hire Phil Collins, and end of story. But you know what? His drumming on this album, it's inoffensive. Like, it's good. I've heard some people like totally like trash his performance on this album, but he's got some good fills, especially in the knife, which we'll talk about soon. He's got some pretty good, can't complain. Some good drumming. I'm no musician, but doesn't offend me. And the thing is, yeah, all these guys were friends from high school. Just like a lot of other popular bands, they started off playing in high school, and they were from the Charterhouse Academy, which was this prestigious high school in England. And these guys were set up to be big shots. Like the big politicians, like bankers, architects, you name it. They were poised to be like the upper echelon of society. And it's awesome how they just said fuck all that shit. Let's form a band and totally like revolutionize music, and that's totally what they did. I mean, the lineup on this album is unique in the Genesis discography, but it's just awesome how a band can they could have just gone on with their careers, became rich, became successful, but no, they had a genuine love of music. And that's what I love about Genesis. They truly had something to say. They truly had something to add to the music scene. No other band sounds like Genesis. So, fantastic lineup on this album. Now I'm just going to delve into my personal thoughts on how I discovered it, and then we'll get into the song. So, how did I get into this album? Well, I remember it like it was yesterday. I was 14 years old in my first year of high school, and at this point, I had already got into a lot of my favorite bands like Led Zeppelin, Rush, Sabbath, Pink Floyd, and I had just heard of Genesis, and I was getting into their albums, and I was just floored. It was like the floodgates of my mind burst open. To hear a band this creative at such an impressionable age literally changed my life. And to this day, I've never been the same. I still love those bands, Zeppelin, Rush, yes, just as much as Genesis, but Genesis is special. Unlike the other bands, well, I shouldn't say that as a general statement, but more or less, unlike the other bands, their forte was creating atmosphere. That was their that was what made them so great. They were masters of atmosphere. No one constructed a song like Genesis. They construct a song to transport you into the world of that song. They're really masters at creating moods rather than other progressive bands which are more known for like virtuoso playing and all that. Don't get me wrong. Genesis has some of the best musicians of all time, but their real forte is creating atmosphere, creating mood, creating like fantasy inspired lyrics that just transport you. And discovering Genesis back then was literally one of the funnest things I've ever done in my life. So I had been a fan of all the early Genesis albums, Selling England, Foxtrot, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and I'm sure if you go back on my channel, you'll see some of my old reviews when I was first getting into those albums, and a review of The Lamb that I can't say I'm very proud of because it was based on the first few listens, and we all know it's impossible to really appreciate the Lamb on the first few listens. So if you want to cringe, go back and check that one out. I'm going to try to heavily correct it with this series. But yeah, so I was into all those albums, but for some reason I never touched Trespass. And then one day I was off school. I think it was like a PA day or something. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? This is the only Peter Gabriel album I haven't heard yet, so why not give it a spin? So I put it on. I heard the opening track, "Looking for Someone." I loved it, and I'm like, damn, this is gonna be another classic. But then after that, it started getting into this really mellow pastoral stuff, and I don't know. I guess my attention span at the time wasn't that great, and I found my mind kind of wandering. And I'm like, you know what? Uh, I'll listen to this another time. And then I kind of just forgot about it. I guess I don't know. I figured they were just starting out. They hadn't developed their sound, and I just didn't really listen to it much. And it's a shame because I think, to be honest, the first time I heard it, I didn't get to the knife. And I know that if I had listened up to the knife, which is the electrifying closing track, it would have probably like knocked my balls off. But yeah, I guess I didn't. And then time went by, and I think the next year I decided to revisit it, listen to it with like a fresh pair of ears. And I sat down and I listened to it about I think about 5 times that day, and it was amazing. I'm like, holy shit! Like, what was I thinking? This is such an underrated album. And the thing about this album is that, as I already mentioned, it's a unique lineup. This lineup would never appear on any other Genesis album, and it has this unique feel about it. So, how do I describe the sound of this album? Well, if you're more familiar with the other Genesis albums, they still have the fantasy lyrics, but it's much less whimsical, and it has a darker tone to it. Like, it kind of feels like you're out in the cold when listening to this album, but in a good way, in a really good way. And I think what really gives it this unique tone is Anthony Phillips and Mike Rutherford, their dual 12 string playing gives it this, and I'm going to say this word a lot in this review, but it gives it this pastoral feel, this folk inspired feel to it. And I guess you could call it like a medieval sounding album. But yeah, their twin 12 string playing really gives it this unique sound, this dark kind of like pastoral sound, which I really love. And there are like pinches of electric guitar throughout the album. As I mentioned, the last song on the album, "The Knife," is literally one of their heaviest songs. I mean, there's points when I listen to this song where it reminds me of Sabbath, for God's sakes. And it's hilarious because you hear the rest of the album and it's so laid back and mellow, and then you get this song just slashing through. And they perfectly reflected this with the album artwork, which is fantastic. I mean, you look at this cover, it looks like a king and queen looking out over this vast field of medieval landscape, and then a slash going through that. And then if you turn it over, you see a knife literally like slashing through the painting of the album cover. And that's shown to represent the knife literally slashing through um, the folk inspired tone of the entire album with like its blazing hard rock sound. And it just really goes to show Anthony Phillips, when he wants to, he can really like crank that electric guitar. Sure, he's a master of the acoustic, but he can really crank that electric. And man, it's just a really unique sounding album. Heavy on the keyboards, definitely heavy on the keyboards, like any Genesis album. But yeah, again, a very laid back and darker tone, has a darker tone to it.
Looking for someone, and now I found myself a name. On the way, leave me. All that I have, I will give. Leave me. All that I have, I will give.
Kicking off the album, we have track one, which is called "Looking for Someone." And this is a true Genesis classic in every sense of the word. A really good forgotten gem from their discography. I never hear anyone talking about this song, and it's a shame because it's a classic. Honestly, it's probably the song on the album, well, probably this and "Stagnation," that really show the direction Genesis were going in. This is a highly progressive song, and right off the bat, you can tell this is going to be drastically different than anything off from Genesis to Revelation. I mean, just the way the song starts off. with Peter Gabriel singing a cappella. He would like later revisit this on a lot of other songs. Well, not many, but most notably Dancing with the Moonlit Night. But this was the first time he did it. And his voice just grips you. Man, Peter Gabriel's voice is honestly it's pretty much fully formed on this album. You could hear bits and pieces of it on the debut, but on this album it's there in all its glory. It's smoky, it's soulful. It has that quirk to it that just gives it that like weird tinge. Sounds like no one else. Honestly, no other singer sounds like Peter Gabriel. And it's just fantastic. And in the intro of this song alone, we see the dynamics of Genesis, and we see how they were really trying to cram so many ideas into a song like this, which is at 7 minutes has a lot of ideas crammed into it. I mean, the way it starts off, Peter Gabriel singing gently, but then it builds up and then goes back down and then builds up again. And you got Anthony Phillips on electric guitar in the background, just accompanying it, plus Peter Gabriel's flute playing, which definitely deserves a mention. Probably influenced by King Crimson, who were notable for including a lot of flute on in the Court of the Crimson King. But in the first 3 minutes alone, it goes through so many moods, so many time changes. It's ridiculous. And then the second half of the song, the last I'd say about the last 4 minutes of the song is just almost completely instrumental, and we could really see Tony Banks, the keyboard player, dominating this part of the song with an intense keyboard solo that just builds up and builds up and builds, and just some great flute playing in the background. Such a dynamic song, and I mean, it's really unique because it does have like hints of electric guitar, but the main instrument is definitely the keyboards. And that's a theme you see a lot with Genesis, where the keyboards act as the main instrument driving the song forward, but the guitar comes in at just the perfect moments. And Steve Hackett, the guitar player that would appear on the next album, was really a master at adding in his guitar parts at literally like the perfect moments to just elevate songs. But more on him later. So lyrically, looking for someone, it's quite a departure from the other songs on the album. As I mentioned before, the songs on this album have a more fantasy based lyrics, but with a darker tone than their future works. This one here, it's more about self discovery, and it's more of an introspective song. So maybe that's why a lot of Genesis fans don't really discuss it too much. Maybe because of the lyrical content. I doubt it. I think it just got lost under the pile of fantastic songs that this band produced at around this time. So definitely check it out. It's currently sitting at number 29 on my Genesis rankings, and I'm going to rate this one a 9.5, which means it's a masterpiece.
Snarling, he tore at the throat of his foe, but Fang fought the hero in vain. Dawn saw the white mountain tinted with red. Never would the crown leave again. One eye is the crown, and with love.
All right, next up on the album, we got track number 2, White Mountain. And this is another one of the highlights for me, guys. Trust me, at first, it might not hit you that hard, but with repeated listens, it'll really crawl under your skin. I mean, this is a really great atmospheric track. Again, another one that really highlights the pastoral sound of the album that I keep going on and on about, and really atmospheric. I mean, lyrically, the song is about a wolf who betrays his pack because he discovers a dark secret of like the White Mountain range where they live, and they try to kill him. And I think at the end of the song, they do kill him. But it's just great fantasy lyrics, kind of similar to many of the early Genesis songs. And what really stands out for me with this track is Tony Banks's keyboard playing. I mean, his keyboard playing during the verses are just driving the song forward. It really pumps the song along at a frantic pace, and it really sounds like it really transports you into the world of this song with this wolf trying to escape from his pack and them hunting him down. And it's just, oh man, very atmospheric. Then at the end of this song, you got this haunting whistling and this humming in the background. It kind of makes you feel like you're isolated in like the middle of this vast snowscape, which I guess was the point of the song. And it's just so impressive to be writing atmospheric music like this at such a young age that really transports you into the world of the song. Really strong one. The only critique I have of it is that Peter Gabriel's voice is kind of low in the mix at some points, and I don't know, it's just kind of a production problem, so it doesn't really affect the song that much. But yeah, I do find that at points. But overall, it's a fantastic song. It's currently sitting at number 40 on my Genesis rankings, and I'm gonna give this one a strong 9 out of 10. So another really strong song.
Some believe that when they die, they really live. I believe there never is an end. God gave up this world, its people long ago. Why she's never there, I still don't understand.
All right, coming up next on the album, we got track three, Visions of Angels. And I've seen references saying that this song was actually recorded for From Genesis to Revelation, but I don't know. I highly doubt that. There's something fishy about that because this song is incredible. And, first of all, if it was this good, they would have put it on From Genesis to Revelation. And second of all, I really think, like, it doesn't sound like it belonged on that album. The only thing it really has in common is the general religious theme. But other than that, I think it was recorded for Trespass. The only thing I could probably rationalize is that they had a prototypical version of this ready for From Genesis to Revelation. But then over the next year of touring, they really cracked down and shaped this song into the gem that it truly is. I mean, I really love this song. It's one of those songs that definitely has to grow on you, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful song. From the music to the lyrics, it's incredible. It kind of continues the theme of Trespass with the double acoustic guitars, heavily piano driven, and with lyrics that really like hit close to home. I mean, these lyrics are my interpretation is that we look around the world and we see all this shit going on, like famine, death, war, destruction, all kinds of stuff like that. And you got to think to yourself, like, wow, if God truly existed, he probably gave up this world long ago. And that's basically what Peter Gabriel says, like, flat out in the song. He says God gave up this world, its people, long ago. So it's really about someone who has faith in God, but it just seems like from the world we're living in, he's kind of abandoned us. So it's pretty deep stuff for such a young band, and the music itself is just great. There's this part about at the 2.5 minute mark where the piano just builds up and swells, and then this choir comes in, and it just sounds so angelic. And I guess that was the intention. The only minor criticism I have of this song is that I think they repeat the chorus a little bit too much. I would have liked a little more instrumentation throughout the song, but it's a very minor complaint. And overall, it's a fantastic song. Currently, it's sitting at number 64 on my Genesis rankings, and I'm going to give this one a score of 8.5 out of 10. All right, so now if you have the vinyl of this album, you're going to flip that shit over, and now we're going to be getting into side two. Now, side two is where this album really stands out for me. Now, I love side one, as I've made pretty clear, hopefully, but side two has such an amazing contrast between the songs. I mean, we got songs ranging from like their gentlest, most folk inspired moments to their heaviest, hardest hitting, bone crushing riffs. Well, for Genesis standards, that is. Like, we're not talking about a metal band here, but that final track, it just kills you. But before we get to the final track, you have to wade through the long and dark song Stagnation. Now, this song here, I think if you can get into this song, you will consider Trespass a masterpiece. I consider this the gateway song into getting into this album because I have seen so many differing opinions on this track, that it's ridiculous. Some people like myself consider it a complete masterpiece. I mean, right now it's sitting at number 20 on my Genesis rankings, which is extremely high. And other people think it just goes on way too long at 9 minutes, and there's a lot of empty space, and it's boring and dull and blah blah blah. And I've seen all kinds of differing opinions. So the Genesis crowd seems to be pretty polarized on this song, and you know what? I have a strong feeling that the people that think this song is boring haven't really given it like enough listens. Because think about it, Trespass is a very early album, and chances are you're an asshole like me. You listened to it like the first time, and you couldn't really get into it, and then you put it off for a while. But something from this album made me keep coming back, and that's what you need. You need a hook to keep you coming back. There's something, even if you don't get a song at first, there's always going to be something to pull you back to make you want to try listening to it again and again. And that's what happened to me with Stagnation. Because at first, I was like a lot of people. I thought it was boring. It wasn't really going anywhere. But now that I've listened to it enough times, I find that it's not boring at all. And everything just fits into place with the concept of the song. Everything just works. And it has this like cohesion to it. So if you're stuck on this song, keep trying. And again, everyone has their own opinions. But I really think that this song takes multiple listens to get into. It's a very complex song. And the band themselves considers this probably the best song on the album. I've heard Tony Banks in interviews and Peter Gabriel saying this was a very strong song. Peter Gabriel calls it a journey song. So that just goes to show how good it is. It takes you on a journey, and it really does, both lyrically and musically. So lyrically, what's Stagnation about? Well, it's basically about this dude, this rich dude, who spends his entire fortune to live underground, basically. I'm assuming he builds like a vast mansion underground in this alternate universe or reality. And then one day something happens. The song doesn't specify, which I like. It kind of leaves it up to the listener's interpretation. That totally wipes out the population of planet Earth. And this guy's down there and he decides to come up to the surface. And he's greeted with a vast, desolate wasteland of, I'm assuming, post apocalyptic, maybe like post nuclear war, basically. And he's the last person on Earth. And the song really goes through like all the emotions he's feeling, wandering through the bleak landscape. And really, I think at the end of the song, he probably goes insane. So I'll just quote you some of the lyrics from later in the song right here, where he says, "And I will wait forever beside the silent mirror and fish for bitter minnows amongst the weeds and slimy water." And then he goes on about how he wants to take a drink. Peter Gabriel goes on and on with this passionate singing near the end of the song about how he needs a drink to wash the filth that is deep in his guts. I mean, damn, that's some pretty striking imagery right there. And then the end of the song finishes with "Let us drink and let us smile and then let us go." So my interpretation is that he probably drinks this like poison water and to commit suicide because he can't basically stand the thought of being the last person on Earth, which is ironic considering he spent his fortune to keep himself isolated underground. So lyrically, it's a really interesting song, and that's just my interpretation of it. But musically, oh my god, it's just fantastic, so atmospheric. It starts off with Peter Gabriel just gently singing, some nice acoustic guitar in the background, and then it gets into this strange. I don't even know what instrument it is. I know it's like some form of keyboard tone, but it gets into this lengthy dreamscape, and it has this like melancholic feel to it before totally changing mood into this uplifting instrumental. And it's insane. It kind of reminds me of Alan's psychedelic breakfast at points. It's just so uplifting, so jaunty, and then before you know it, that suddenly ends. It abruptly cuts, and then it gets into those verses I was talking about earlier, where he's wandering the landscape and drinking from the filthy water, and the mood just totally changes. It goes from melancholic to euphoric. It's one of the most bipolar songs I've ever heard. And that's what makes it so interesting, to me. I feel like every part of this song serves its purpose. And in that earlier keyboard part, the really the really dark melancholic part, I think that's where people start thinking the song's boring because it does go on for a little while, not that long, maybe like a minute or two, and it's just really laid back, really atmospheric. And I think it represents when he first rises to the surface and he's just wandering the landscape and everything's just, just totally laid waste. And I think it does a perfect job of conjuring up that imagery. Yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to say is the point of this song is that it's big on atmosphere. And it does take many listens to appreciate because of the unconventional structure that they use on this song. I mean, this song is structured like no other I've ever heard before, and you really have to hear it to believe it. So fantastic song, one of the best on the album, and a very strong 9.5 out of 10. All right, moving on to track 5, a nice 4-minute ballad known as Dusk. And I don't really have too much to say about Dusk. It's a really good ballad. Has some great flute playing by Peter Gabriel, as always. Some nice ensemble singing. And I think it's just a nice way to kind of cushion the two epics on the album. We already talked about Stagnation and the final closing track, the monumental The Knife. And it's just a nice buffer between those two 9-minute epics. Pretty good song. It's currently sitting at number 86 on my Genesis rankings with a solid rating of 7.5 out of 10. Really enjoyable track for me. All right, the moment you've all been waiting for, the final track on the album, the one I've been alluding to this entire time, the epic 9-minute masterpiece, The Knife. And I'm sure most fans would agree that this is definitely one of Genesis's most enduring classic songs. And the funny thing about it is that it sounds like no other Genesis song. No other song that they wrote was this heavy, this rockin', this just, oh my god, this exciting. Not that their other songs aren't exciting, but I gotta say this is probably their most exciting. And it's just so strange because it comes right at the tail end of this album that's so heavy on atmosphere, so heavy on like folk inspired instrumentals, and at the end of the album you just get this 9-minute hard hitting, basically, let's not beat around the bush. It's like hard rock, even like proto metal at some points. Like this is a heavy song, and we got to keep in mind this is for Genesis standards. Obviously, I'm not saying this is as heavy as like a Metallica song or an Iron Maiden song, but for Genesis standards, and even for the standards of the time, this was a hard hitting track. There's points that remind me of Sabbath, like in the soloing and like a lot of the riffs, and it's just great. And normally I would complain about a song sounding so different from the entire album, but I honestly think it was an artistic statement on their point because even the album artwork, as I mentioned before, alludes to this song, and it just goes to show that they were a band that could really do anything. I mean, if you can pull off like folk songs, or I shouldn't say folk songs, but like folk progressive songs earlier on the album, and then slap this beast on there, and without even batting an eye, you got to be a genius. I mean, this song's great. And a lot of people complain that the version on this album is nowhere near as good as the live version on the Genesis live album. People say, "Oh, it doesn't have Steve Hackett and it doesn't have Phil Collins drumming on it." Okay, sure, I'll give it to you. The one on that live album is fucking amazing, but that doesn't take anything away from the studio version. Anthony Phillips does an amazing job. John Mayhew, okay, he's no Phil Collins, but like he puts a lot of energy into it. But yeah, the real star of the show is definitely Tony Banks and Anthony Phillips. I mean, I'm making this song sound like it's like heavily guitar driven, and it is. Like Anthony Phillips has a lot of amazing, hard hitting solos that sound nothing like any of the other songs on the album, and just prove what a versatile guitarist is. But at the end of the day, the main riff of this song is driven by Tony Banks's keyboard work, and I don't even know how to describe this riff. It's hard to explain. It's kind of like it's upbeat, it's jaunty, and it just drives the song forward. And then you have Peter Gabriel basically just, oh my god, unleashing like a complete battering of lyrics over this riff, and it just fits so perfectly. There's such an intensity to it, and then it gets into this fantastic guitar solo by Anthony Phillips, the first of many. I mean, there's like a lot of guitar solos on this song, and the interesting thing is that it's not all heavy. Like it's not a heavy song from start to finish for the whole 9 minutes. In the middle of the song, there's this amazing. I think it's about 2 minutes long. The song suddenly drops tempo, and you get this beautiful flute driven flute driven buildup. It feels like there's a storm brewing, like a battle, an army amassing, something like that, which I guess was the whole point. And then you get this army chant that gradually builds up. It goes, "We are always wanting freedom." And that repeats and repeats and builds until you get this scream. And then at this point, you're at around like the 5 minute mark, and the song just totally unleashes. All hell breaks loose on you. I mean, the riffs in this song, honestly, like this is when the song reminds me of Sabbath with these heavy ass riffs. Oh my god, the band just comes in all saddles blazing, just insane. And it's just such a unique sound because you do have the heavy riffs, you do have the heavy guitar solos, but Tony Banks is doing his thing in the background with the organ as well, and it creates this amazing contrast. Like if Sabbath had an organ player, that's what this part sounds like. And you know what? You could really hear the influence that Genesis had on Iron Maiden. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent now, but I read many interviews where Steve Harris quoted Genesis as one of the main influences that influenced the Iron Maiden sound. And at first I was thinking about it, I'm like, what the fuck? Like, it sounds nothing like Iron Maiden. Maybe their need to create epics was like their main link, and that's the most I thought about it. But then when you really listen to songs like The Knife and The Musical Box on their next album, you hear parts like this and you say, "Holy shit, that sounds like Iron Maiden." Like the way that the song gallops and builds up, and like the rise and fall in tempo, and you can really see like, holy shit, a young Steve Harris would have definitely been inspired by this music. And it's just incredible how a progressive rock band from England from the early 70s influenced one of the most hard hitting metal bands of the 80s, hands down, Iron Maiden. I mean, they're fucking masters. But it's just insane how that works out. Like how people take inspiration from so many different genres of music. And you could definitely see how the progressive edge rubbed off on Maiden with all their epics and all their time changes and everything. And it's just amazing. The last 4 or 5 minutes of the song are just incredible. One of the greatest Genesis moments. And then the main riff comes back in with a keyboard. There's some amazing drum fills. And then, yeah, it's just a great way to wrap up the song. And it leaves you speechless at the end. I mean, one of the best closing tracks ever. So currently, The Knife, it's sitting pretty high on my list at number 13, my 13th favorite Genesis song. And I'm going to give it a very, very strong 9.5 out of 10. Now, I bet you're wondering, why are you only giving it a 9.5 out of 10? Like, why not a 10? Well, with my rating system, I only give 10s to, like, literally, like, the greatest songs of all time, like the epic upper echelon masterpieces. And this song just barely scratches that surface. Like, it's almost a 10. It's almost a 10 out of 10. The only thing holding it back is that there's some sections that sound kind of muddy. Again, the drumming isn't, it's not Phil Collins, but it's not subpar either. But it doesn't leave you breathless. And there's just like minor things like that prevent it from getting like the full marks. But honestly, it's a fantastic song, one of my favorite songs of all time, and just again one of the best closing tracks ever. So thank you so much for listening to this video. We went through Trespass song by song. I know this video is extremely long, but I can't help my passion for Genesis. I just have so much to say about them. And I hope this video maybe inspired you guys to give this album another chance. Give it the recognition it deserves, because I definitely feel it's one of their most underrated albums. And the next video is going to be an album that I don't think is underrated by anyone. The classic Nursery Crime. And people say Nursery Crime, oh, it's way better than Trespass. It's such an improvement. And I do like it better than Trespass, but I wouldn't say it's a huge improvement. I would say it's an improvement, but Trespass is pretty close up there. So thank you so much for watching this video. There's going to be a lot more reviews to come, and I really appreciate it. All right, take it easy, guys.